So XNPV and XIRR are used for irregular cash flows. So NPV and IRR are very useful as long as you have consistent and frequency is unchanged every month, every year, so forth. But if the cash flows are changing and the frequency of the cash flows is also not constant, then you can use XNPV, which is really great help that we have this. Otherwise, you'd have a whole series of problems that you'd have to work out at the same time. But XNPV works like this. So you type in XNPV, open the parentheses, you need the discount rate, then you need the values, those are the cash flows, and they have to be entered in as a block. You see that B5 to B10, they can't be entered individually. And the dates, and they have to be entered the same way. They don't have to be next to each other, but they do have to be entered the same way and have the same number of rows. Close the parenthesis, again net present value of about $91 negative. The IRR, XIRR, open the parentheses, give the values, give the dates. And they also have to be entered in like that as an array, column arrays. Okay, and I get 8.57%. Now it should say that XNPV cannot handle leaving anything out. If you don't have a cash flow in one of these time frames, delete off that entry, right? Instead of putting in a 0. 0 is okay, it can handle that. But if there's no cash flow there, you might as well just leave that one empty. So works great, no problem. What you might find here is that I've got each of these is going on. So this is the, say, year 0, year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to here, year 7. So if I was going to do this with a net present value function, I would get the interest rate and I get the values, all the future cash flows, and add in the initial cash flow. And I can get the IRR the same way, except for that I need the initial cash flow included. Okay, so this is what I would get with NPV and IRR. And I want to show you that there's actually a slight difference that you'll get if you use XNPV and XIRR. I'm using the same discount rate. I'm using the same values. Now XNPV gets to use all those cash flows, and the cash flow that happens up front is essential. That's the one that we're valuing it at. And the dates. Okay, and I got a number that's about $4 less. Well, this is because after these first 4 years, this cash flow that's at time 4 and all the ones after that, there's been a leap year in that time frame. So because of the leap day that occurred, this is actually 366 days and not 365 days after the previous one. And so, but the XNPV is looking at this in terms of days, and it assumes there's 365 days in every year. So it is not considering this to be 1 year after this date. It's 1 year and 1/365th more. So since all these cash flows are 1/365th of a year later, they get discounted a little bit more. So the net present value is going to be a little bit worse. The IRR, same problem. Or same feature, right? If that's what you're looking for. Oops. Cash flows, dates, and so the difference is enough to cause this IRR to be slightly smaller. I should also point out that you can move dates around. This could be 2002 as well. It has no problem with that. It has no problem if these dates are out of order. But what it does have a problem is if any of these dates are actually before the initial cash flow. Notice how these aren't changing, the NPV and IRR. That's because it's not even using these dates. It's assuming this goes 0, 1, 2, 3, and so forth. All right. So one thing that's critical is that for XNPV, the cash flows have to be not in order, but the first cash flow has to be first, right? We're finding a net present value, so all the cash flows are valued as of this date. And in this case both, the cash flows are at time 0 there is a cash flow. But if you don't have a cash flow, you can't leave it blank. You put in 0. And the number's positive, right? You can't get internal rate of return because there's no negative cash flow. But the present value of all those future cash flows, or the value of all these cash flows as of this date, is 47,880. So there's a lot of nice features in here. It adds a lot of functionality. You just have to remember no deletes, no empty cells, and that this first date is the date that you're evaluating at, and it's a present value, so it's got to be the first of all the dates.